Ys 10 Nordics. Not only has this been one of my most hotly anticipated games of 2024, but just this review alone has been something that I have been so excited to make. If you've been around on my channel for a little while, you may remember that the PlayStation 5 port of Ys 9 Monstrum Nox was actually the very first video game that I got an early review code for. As a small content creator on YouTube, that was easily one of the biggest milestones that I had reached at that time. And thanks to NIS America, I've had the privilege of getting to play Ys 10 Nordics for the past couple of weeks to get this review out to you guys. And it actually came out about a year ago in Japan exclusively, but now it's overseas and I've had the opportunity to play this game fully in English. I love the Ys series. I'm a huge action RPG fan, and admittedly, the only Ys games that I have not played have been Ys 7 and Ys 8. And I know that that can sound like sacrilege to a lot of people who love Ys 8, but I love all of the previous entries as well, and I had a great time with Ys 9 Monstrum Nox. And like I said, Ys 10 Nordics has been one of my most anticipated games of this year. So how is the game? Let's talk about it. So like I mentioned, this is kind of a big moment for me to be able to review this game and tell you guys about it. Like I mentioned, there are still 2 games in the Ys series that I have not gotten to play, Ys 7 and Ys 8, but just to get this out of the way, Ys 10 is a game that you can play without having played any of the Ys games. And just to get this out of the way too, this is one of the earliest entries in the timeline. Ys Origins is the earliest in the timeline, taking place in many years before the original 2 Ys games, but this game, Ys 10, actually takes place right after Ys 1 and 2 and right before Memories of Celceta. Sure, there are little references here and there and homages to a lot of the series that are contained in this game, but overall, you're not going to be missing anything as far as important plot details for this game, so you don't have to play 9 other Ys games in order to truly enjoy and appreciate what Ys 10 Nordics has to offer. You can just start this game knowing that it's one of Adol's earliest adventures, and you don't have to know anything else. I just mentioned that because as a fan of games like Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts, I've already made videos on my channel on where you should start in those games, and for the Ys series, I feel like it's important to note that Ys 10 is absolutely a wonderful starting point for a newcomer to the series. If you've seen any of my reviews before, you'll know that I kind of like to break up my reviews into sections: the good, the mixed, and the bad. I'm just going to be flat out honest here and just say that I mostly have nothing but positive things to say about this game. If I can think of some critiques here and there towards the end of the video, I'll bring them up, but for the most part, this is going to be a fan gushing about Ys 10. I'm gonna do my best to try to be as objective as I can whenever it's needed in this review, but this is just my opinion of this game, and I've been playing it for hours and hours, and I have just enjoyed this game so much, and I'm so excited to tell you guys about this game. But let's just go ahead and start talking about the story to this game. This journey takes place in the northern islands of the world, collectively known as the Obelia Gulf. Like I mentioned, this is one of the earlier entries that Adol has gone on, so this is right after Ys 2, and he's on his way to Celceta. If you've played Memories of Celceta, this is taking place right before all of that. The Obelia Gulf can definitely be a brutal area of the world. The primary tribe that sort of runs this region are known as the Normans. The Normans are a seafaring people who absolutely resemble that of Vikings and a lot of other Nordic culture. Soon after starting the adventure, you are quickly introduced to the main enemy of these lands called the Grieger. Adol then partners up with a Norman warrior named Karja, and they set out to the seas to stop the Grieger and uncover their mysterious agenda. This is all essentially the main premise of the story. This is kind of your introduction to the world and how your adventure starts. I don't want to get too into the weeds as far as who these Grieger are and what they're like and who the Normans are, because a lot of that really is very interesting to uncover as you're playing the game. For me, Ys 10 has been easily the most narrative-heavy game in the series. As you're exploring the world, whether it be on sea or in towns and and villages and things like that, you're going to encounter a lot of other NPCs as well, and I just personally felt that many of the NPCs kind of had their own little narratives going on, whether it be through side quests or literally just through talking to NPCs and kind of checking back in with them as you're playing the game. Like I said, you don't even need to do any side quests to understand maybe what some of these characters are dealing with on an individual level in many of the cases. Sure, there are definitely side quests where the whole point is to continue to press into the individual nature of many of these side characters, but I just overall felt that this region of the world has already felt like one of the most populated regions of any of the Ys games that I've played so far. Like many of the Ys games, there are a lot of characters to meet. There's an affinity system where as you are meeting characters and performing side quests for them, you can continue to build your relationship with them and continue to uncover more about these characters and learn more about them and the world that they're in and their environments and the economy and things like that. There's just so much rich density to this area. While you're exploring islands as well, you'll find these large monoliths where you can uncover more of the lore and the history and just the entire backstory of who the Normans are. You get an understanding of where they came from and what type of people they are, how they're conceived of today, and just, it's so interesting. I love the way that this game has built up a lot of this mythos of the Normans. And as I move towards talking about the gameplay, I think that the story and the overall gameplay go very well hand in hand with one another, as this is a game where you are only playing as two characters, Adol and Karja. Many of the Ys games have you playing as multiple characters where you can switch back and forth between many different types of gameplay styles through these characters. This is a game that only sees Adol and Karja as your two playable characters, and I really like the limitations that brings. I'll go into those limitations later, but I do mean that in a positive way. Being that we can focus very heavily on Adol and his relationship to Karja is a great thing, and I feel like that is one of the reasons why I felt that the narrative was so dense here, because we could really focus on a very small group of people. Sure, we get to meet a lot of the people early on, and we get to learn more about them throughout the playtime of this game, but really, this is a story of a personal relationship between two characters, and I love that. Many people might be disappointed to hear that we don't get to play as 5 or more other characters throughout the course of this game, but that doesn't mean that there's not a lot of depth to the gameplay of these two characters. In the story, we get acclimated to this concept of magic called mana. The mana is the thing that gives your characters all of these very special abilities, but it also creates a story direct reason for why these two characters are together. They're, in the most literal sense, inseparable. You have to be with Karja. Karja has to be with Adol. So being that they really can't step away from one another, they have to learn to work together. So that is kind of the story and gameplay connective tissue there. At the tap of a button, you can switch between Adol and Karja at any point in the game. Each individual character has their normal attacks and special abilities as well, but outside of just the individual players, there is also this sort of link up attack system. This system is called duo mode. Instead of individually playing as either of the characters, you can hold down a trigger that allows you to attack together to basically perform these large combos and these huge special attacks that are specifically designed to be performed by both Adol and Karja. Mechanically, it's almost like a third character. I love it, and like all of the other Ys games prior to it, there is a level up system. You continue to mow down enemies in the game, and as you are continuing to progress, you are learning new abilities, and you just keep on getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and you can take out bigger waves of enemies and large high-level enemies as well, and it always feels so good to have your characters just be constantly leveling up and working together and working individually to just take over the world. And speaking of the mana, there's also kind of a sphere grid type of ability menu. As you're leveling up, you can open up this menu that allows you to continue to add little buffs and debuffs to your characters. If you've played Final Fantasy X, it works in a very similar way, where you can decide what abilities you want to go in a perfectly empty slot that you've unlocked. It's not overly complicated, and like I said, if you've played Final Fantasy X, you should basically likely be able to fully understand how this works as soon as it's introduced to you. But outside of the hand-to-hand combat with Adol and Karja, we've got boats in this game. This is like the Wind Waker meets Assassin's Creed Black Flag of the East series. This is just another area of the game where a lot of this Norman or even Nordic culture really shines through the gameplay. You can upgrade aspects of your ship like its speed and its HP and defenses, but you can also equip the ship with lots of different types of artillery that will help you in naval battles. The Grieger aren't just on land, but they're also on these boats as well. So you are going out and fighting against enemies in these ships. Sometimes you'll just see a rogue ship out in the waters, but most of the time you can kind of decide whether or not you want to get into these boat battles via these waypoints that appear in the middle of the ocean that spawn a ton of Grieger ships. You gradually get more and more acclimated to the way that the ship mechanic works as you proceed throughout the story, so things like its speed and defenses and things like that definitely do increase further on. I will just say that once it's first introduced to you, things can definitely feel very sluggish and very slow, and it feels like you're trying to learn this whole new mechanic that has nothing to do with any of the other types of gameplay mechanics in the game, and it can be a little jarring at first. Obviously, as Ys games go, and as an Ys fan, I personally feel that the real meat and potatoes of this game is still just the hand-to-hand combat and doing this sort of new duo mechanic with Karja and Adol together. But like I said, I think this gameplay edition of the naval ships and things like that can be really fun, especially when it comes to challenges like taking over a base where you are just going through waves and waves of enemies, and the game really does try to put an emphasis on the ship battles. There are even moments where you can commandeer other Grieger ships and win battles in that way. There's also a lot of customization when it comes to the accessibility of the game. You can map any command or ability to any button that you want. If you're playing on PS5 and you don't like pressing square to swap between characters and you want to map it to something like L2 or something like that, you can do that. I think the game is just really, really fun. If you are a fan of the Ys games for their gameplay, I think that this is a must play. I think that you're going to find a lot of things to really enjoy about the sort of limited nature of only 2 characters, as well as the added gameplay feature of these naval battles. But before I end this video, we've got to talk about how this game is presented primarily with the music. If you know, you know. These games simply don't miss as far as the music goes. Is it the most memorable soundtrack that I've heard in an Ys game? No, but that doesn't mean that it's still not really, really good. Even just this morning, I played a little bit of it, and while I was helping make my family breakfast, I was just whistling to myself the ship just music while you're just sailing the open seas, just the song that's playing there. I do whistle that from time to time, so it's not the most memorable, but there are still some earworms in there every now and then, which is a great thing for a video game. And just from a visual standpoint, I personally found this to be the best looking Ys game, especially whenever it comes down to just things like the character models themselves. I love the way that all of these characters are portrayed. On a fidelity level, I think that the games do get better and better over time. Some people prefer the style of Ys 9 over Ys 8. Some people definitely like the style of Ys 8 over Ys 9, but this is a game where if you really liked Ys 8, and I know that I said that I personally haven't played Ys 8, I think that you will like what you're just looking at. The vibe is absolutely more akin to Ys 8 than it is to Ys 9. Ys 9 is in a city. You're not really exploring much outside of a large stone all around you type city, whereas Ys 8 was more an island exploration game. And this is a game where you are going from island to island, and there's a lot of different variety. There are some very large stone type areas, but there's also a ton of grassy and beach areas and things like that in this game. So if you liked the style of Ys 8, I think that you will love the style of Ys 10. Really, I think one of the only gripes or nitpicks that I can really get into with this game is I just felt that the gameplay took a while to actually appear. Like very early on, you can explore and you can get into a few battles here and there and kind of learn about some of the gameplay systems in the game. But I think it took me about 3 or 4 hours before I really got my hands on what it's like to play the game. There's a lot of setup here. There's a lot to be introduced to. So there's lots of cutscenes and there's lots of dialogues. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, one thing that I noticed in this game compared to many of the other titles was just how many times it gives you an option for Adol's dialogue. If you're new to the series, Adol is quote unquote a silent protagonist. His voice acting comes in the form of little quotes here and there in the field of battle. So like he'll say things like, take this, you know, those types of action dialogues.
What's this?
But I found that in much of the story, there are many moments where people will ask Adol what his opinion is on something, or he'll just chime in with something, and you get a dialogue option or two where you can decide what he says. And I felt that compared to other games, this probably had the most amount of times where I got to choose what Adol says. Sorry for getting a little off track there, but yeah, there is a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of setup. So it just felt to me that it took a little while to actually get a feel for what the gameplay is like. But once you're in, you're in. And I personally found the story and the narrative to be gripping enough to where that's really the only thing that I was really just enthralled in at the very beginning of the game. And it keeps you hooked until you get to that point where you can explore. And then that's the other thing that you are most focused on, is just playing the game and going into all of these different islands and all these other sequences of gameplay. I felt that there was so much here to love. It just took a little while to get to that point where I was really enthralled in the gameplay. I felt like this was a long-winded review. There was just so much that I wanted to say about the game and so much that I liked. Even just little things like fishing. You can go fishing in this game and it's super simple. It's like the most bare bones sort of fishing mini game that you can do in a game, but I loved it. I don't know why. I'm not even like a fishing fan, but there was just something about the fishing mechanic here in the game where if there's a body of water and there's an option to fish, you can just go fish anywhere, and I love it. And I don't know, there's just a lot here that I love, and I just can't help but just gush about it. But what do you guys think about Ys 10 Nordics? Have you already purchased the game? Are you planning on playing it? Have you been playing it? Let me know all of your thoughts about not only just Ys 10, but let me know what you think about this series as a whole. Tell me what your favorite entry in the Ys series is. And while you're down there commenting, go ahead and hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell as well, so that you're notified whenever new videos like this go up. And if you're a fan of Ys or other RPGs, whether they be turn-based or action RPGs, and you just love compelling narratives, go into the description box below and join my Discord. There's a ton of other gamers in there who love this type of game. So if that's you and you want to join a group of other like-minded individuals to talk about video games like this, please consider joining the Discord down below. But that's it. I love this game, and I'm really glad that I got to play it, and a huge thank you again to NIS America for giving me the opportunity to play this game early. I just love talking about this game. If you're down there and you love talking about Ys as well, I'm excited just to have a conversation with you guys as well. So let me know all of your thoughts down below. And with all of that said, I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye.